Welcome, everyone, to the House of Seven Beggars. It is Monday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. Of course, this is the House of Seven Beggars. Therefore, it must be Zeyde's Story Corner. That's right, Zeyde's Story Corner. So, we continue reading from our book, Yiddish Folktales from the People of Evil. And we haven't even made a dent into this book. These are a lot of stories. Yes, a lot of stories. So we have got plenty to keep us busy for quite a while. Let us see who we have in the chat room. Now we have to scroll up here. Let's see. We have Claire, Roger, Susan, Veronica, let's see, Rabbi Shlomo, Mary, Shlomo Shoshi, and let's see, Kelsey Lynn, and Guy. Okay, so I think we've got everybody. So we apologize if we've missed anybody. We'll try and catch up after the break. So we're almost at the end of the first portion of this book. Yes, the stories about children. Yeah, these were stories about they're kind of a little overboard about the trials and tribulations of children and so on and so forth. But the next stories that we'll be getting into are a little more in-depth stories, a little longer stories, maybe a few cliffhangers in there. I know Donald likes cliffhangers, so we will see. So let us get you onto your camera. And let's see. Hopefully the camera is going to behave tonight. With any luck, it's going to behave. We shall see, won't we? Okay, so this first story. Oh, I see Colleen has joined us. Good to see you, Colleen. Okay, so this first story is called The Naughty Little Girl. And of course, we know how this is going to start right off the bat before we even get started, right? Can you guess? That's right. Once upon a time, there was an old crone who lived all alone in a hut in an open field. And she used to take in naughty children who would not obey their parents. Well, one day a mother gave the crone her naughty daughter and said, "Teach her to be obedient." The crone took the little girl with her, and they went off into the forest to gather kindling. That's not kinderling, it's kindling. You know, it's a big difference between that. One is a little child, or a bunch of little children, and the other one is a bunch of little sticks. I know sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, but anyway. Okay. Meanwhile, a bear came to the old crone's hut and began to turn around and around. As he was turning around and around, a dog came up and asked him, "Bear, why are you turning like that?" "What difference does it make?" said the bear. "Why don't you turn too?" Then both of them turned around and around, and as they were turning around, along came a stag, that is a big male deer, and said, "Hey bear, hey dog, why are you turning like that?" They said, "What difference does it make? Why don't you turn too?" Then all three of them turned around and around, and as they were turning, along came a rooster and said, "Hey bear, hey dog, hey stag, why are you turning like that?" They said, "What difference does it make? Why don't you turn too?" Then all five of them turned around and around, and as they were turning around and around, along came a bit of pitch and a pin and said, "Hey bear, and dog, and stag, and rooster, and teapot cover." Now, where the heck did the teapot cover come from? I don't know. It just kind of appeared, didn't it? Okay, well, whatever. "Why are you turning like that?" They said, "What difference does it make? Why don't you turn too?" Then all seven of them turned around and around until night fell, and it was time for them to go to sleep. Well, where should they sleep? Inside the old crone's hut, that is. So they went inside, and each of them found a place to sleep. The bear lay down on the bed, the dog in the cradle, the stag on the oven, the rooster on a shelf, the teapot cover in the chimney, the bit of pitch inside a box of matches, and the pin, unable to find any place else, stuck himself into a towel, which seems to be a theme that we see here. You remember last week the grandma bear with the pins in yeah, I remember. Okay, so he stuck himself into the towel. Okay, so there he is. Everybody is nice and snug. Okay, so when the crone and the little girl came back from the forest, they wanted to go to sleep. They went to the bed, and the bear kicked them out and frightened them, so they sprang away. They tried to lay down in the cradle, and the dog bit them. "Ouch! Ouch!" they cried. "What's going on here?" Next, they tried to lay down on the oven, but the stag threatened them with his horns and made them terribly tremble and turn cold with fear. The crone went to the oven to warm herself, but the teapot cover fell out of the chimney and struck her hand. Frightened, the crone cried, "Woe is me! What's going on here?" Meaning to light the lamp so she could see what was happening, she opened. I think I would have found a match a lot quicker than that. But then again, I wasn't there. So there you have it. Meaning to light the lamp so she could see what was happening, she opened the matchbox to take out a match. But the bit of pitch stuck so tightly to her finger she could not shake it off. So she washed her hands to get rid of the pitch. Then she reached for the towel, and guess what happened? But the pin pricked her so hard she began to yell. The rooster, hearing her, yelled back, "You don't scare me." When the crone heard that, she was so frightened she dropped dead on the spot. The little girl, meanwhile, ran from the hut. I guess she was the only smart one in the group, eh? She ran from the hut and all the way home to her mother. From then on, She was an obedient child and did everything her mother told her to do. And afterwards, children everywhere obeyed their mothers. So there you have it. Okay, let us we have a few pages to turn to get to the next one. So, okay, this is our 27th story. And this one is called Hang the Mean on My Palace Roof. So here we go. Can you guess how this starts? Yep. Once upon a time, there was an old fisherman who lived with his wife in a little hut beside the sea. As he was fishing one day, he caught a duck that swam by and took it home to his wife. Sometime later, the duck laid a brass egg. Can you imagine such a thing? The man took the egg to the poretz, that is the local squire, who gave him a kopeck for it. The fisherman was very pleased. A while later, the duck laid a silver egg. Again, the man took the egg to the squire, who this time gave him 2 kopecks. Later still, the duck laid a golden egg. Can you imagine such a thing? The man took the egg to the squire, who said, "Fisherman, sell me the duck. I'll give you a rendel for it." Now, a rendel was a gold coin worth more than the fisherman could make in a lifetime. But he wasn't sure he necessarily wanted to sell a duck that lays golden eggs. So he said, "Let me talk it over with my wife." His wife said, "You'd better sell him the duck for the rendel. Otherwise, since he is the squire, he's likely to take it from us." So, seeing the wisdom in it, the man took the duck to the squire, who gave him a rendel for it. The squire looked the duck over and noticed that there was some blue markings under its right wing, but he couldn't read them. So he sent for the priest, who looked at the blue markings and read aloud, "He who eats the liver of this duck will become king, and he who eats the right wing will become viceroy." So the squire had the duck killed and its liver and right wing put into a pot to cook. And he sat stroking his belly while he waited for the precious meal. But the squire's 2 sons, both of them terribly hungry, ran into the kitchen and saw the pot cooking. They lifted the cover, and the older son snatched up the liver and ate it, while the younger son ate the wing. Just then, the cook came in to dish up the meal. Finding that it had been eaten, he roared, "Who did this?" The children replied, "We did." The cook hurried to the squire and fell on his knees. "Your two sons ate the dish I was making for you." The squire was furious and sent for the priest to ask his advice. The priest said, "Order your sons to be killed and eat their livers. That way you'll get to be king." So the squire sent for the cook and said, "I want you to kill my sons and roast their livers." The cook fell on his knees and begged, "Oh Lord, have pity on your own children." But the squire ordered the cook whipped, and finally the cook agreed to do it. That night, when the children were sleeping, the cook went into their room with a huge knife and was sharpening it. He stood there sharpening the knife, sharpening and sharpening as the tears rolled down his cheeks. The sound of the knife on the sharpening stone woke them, and they saw him sharpening and weeping. "Why are you crying?" they asked. "Because the squire has commanded me to kill you and cook your livers for him to eat." The older boy said, "Have pity on us. Why don't you let us go and kill our dog? Let father eat their livers." So the cook killed and buried the dogs and carried their livers to the squire. Now, as for the boys, they jumped out of the window and ran away. Good thinking, eh? They traveled on and on until they came to a large city. There they went from street to street looking for some way to earn their living. As they passed an open window, they saw a tailor. "Little tailor," they said, "can you help us earn our clothes and food?" The tailor replied, "Take needles and thread, scissors and pressing irons. Help me cut and sew, to baste and press clothes, and then I'll feed and clothe you." So the boys took up needles and thread, scissors and pressing irons, and helped the tailor to cut and to sew, to baste hams, and to press clothes. They became good apprentice tailors. One day, the king died, and the king's daughter announced, "I will marry the strongest and cleverest man in the country." So all the strongest men in the country were sent for, and a great wrestling contest was held. Big-time wrestling, I guess. A very strong man from the other side of the Hor Koshech, the mountain of darkness, defeated everyone until the two tailors' apprentice came along. Everyone laughed at them, but the older apprentice wrestled with the champion and beat him. Then the younger apprentice wrestled with all the other strong men and defeated them. To choose between the two winners, the princess ordered 50 candles lighted in a row. She said that Whichever apprentice could blow out the candles with a single breath would be her husband. Both brothers, however, blew them out in a single breath. Next, the princess said to the older apprentice, "Take the moon out of the sky and hang it from the tip of the palace roof." He replied, "First, braid me a rope of sand so I can use it to hang the moon from the tip of the palace roof." The princess said to the younger apprentice, "Go up to the sun and bring back one of its coals so I can use it to heat my oven." He replied, "Harness the wind to your chariot so I can use it to drive up to the sun for the coal to heat your oven." The princess said to the older apprentice, "Sew me a dress without any seam." He replied, "Give me a length of silk made of smoke, and I'll sew you a dress without a seam." The princess said to the younger apprentice, "Sew me a coat without taking my measurements." He replied, "Give me an endless length of thread, and I'll sew you a coat without taking your measurements." Well, the princess still didn't know which of the two to marry, so she cast lots for her. So they cast lots for her, and the lot fell to the older apprentice. He became the king, and his brother was made viceroy. One day, the king said to the viceroy, "Let us take a trip back to our old home and see what's going on there." "Good idea," the viceroy said. They wore shabby clothing over their royal garments and stuck needles and threads into their lapels. They took shears and pressing irons with them and rode away to the village of their father, the squire. They arrived in the evening and asked for a place to sleep. They were told, "You can sleep in the kitchen behind the oven," to which they replied, "Good." Just then the squire sent for them. The brothers were taken to a room where their father was sitting with the priest and a group of noblemen. The squire said, "Tailor boys, tell us an interesting tale." So they began the story of the magic duck and related all that had happened to them from the time they ate its liver and wing to the time when the older brother became king and the younger one became viceroy. And when they were finished their tale, they threw off their ragged clothes and stood revealed in their imperial garments. Everyone fell to his knees before them and bowed down. The squire and the priest were beheaded, while the cook was taken with great honor to the royal palace and made prime minister. From that day to this, they have lived content and have never again known any want. So, okay, let us see. We are about at our halfway point. I want to take a break now because I don't want to interrupt the next story. The next story is called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And not the one you think it is. But when we return, we will read about the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So, stay tuned. We will be back in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies. Everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back, just as promised. Okay. So, this story, as I said, is called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Okay, so before we get going here, I see that Miles has joined us. Good to see you, Miles. And Susan has had to go. So I hope you have a good night, Susan. Okay, now, some people have commented that, yeah, the stories are a little gruesome. Yes. But have you ever read Grimm's fairy tales? These are pretty mild compared to those, huh? Okay, so they used to, in the old days, these stories are traded. You know, it was like currency. Storytellers would go from town to town, and then they would get together in groups, and they would tell each other stories. And one story, they would trade stories with each other, and they would carry them on. They change them a little bit here and there, but they pretty much keep the main theme of the story going. Okay, yeah, I'm going to fool you with this one, Veronica. This one starts out, once a rich man. No once upon a time here, eh? Once a rich man who had no children went to consult a wonder Rebbe. The Rebbe said, you were born with either of two fates. You can be rich, or you can have children. It is up to you. If you have children, you'll have to be poor. So choose. The man replied, I prefer to have children. The Rebbe said, go back home. In 9 months, your wife will give birth to a son. A few months after he returned home, all the man's goods were destroyed in a fire, and he became a poor man. And in 9 months, his wife gave birth to a son. The family struggled for 13 years to keep their home together. Then, seeing that nothing could be done about their poverty in that town, the father and son decided to beg their way in the wide world. They went from town to town until finally they arrived in the city of Odessa. In Odessa, they went to the house of beggars. You see a theme here? Yes, I do. I get it. Yeah, how about that? They went to the house of beggars, where all the poor folks seemed to be delighted by something. The father asked them, what makes you so happy? Don't you know, they said, there is a rich man in town who makes a banquet for poor folk once a week. If you like, you can come too. So the father and son went to the banquet and had plenty to eat and drink, the best of everything. At one point, a coach drawn by 4 beautiful horses drove up. A sorcerer stepped out and began to astonish the guests by turning himself into a horse, then an elephant, then a lion. Oh, I kind of like that one. And then a cat. He kept the company entertained until 2 o'clock in the morning. When the father was ready to leave, the son said, I won't move from this place until you apprentice me to the sorcerer. The father first reasoned with him. Then he wept. But the son was stubborn. Apprentice me to the sorcerer, he said. So the father ran after the sorcerer's coach and lay down in front of the horses. Sir, he said, my son won't move from his place unless he can become your apprentice. And the sorcerer drew up a contract agreeing to teach the boy sorcery for 3 years. When the time was up, said the sorcerer, you can come and get him. 3 years later, the father arrived at the sorcerer's house. The path to the door was guarded by wild animals, but he loved his son so much that he walked bravely past them. In the house, he found his son sitting with the sorcerer and the sorcerer's daughter. The sorcerer recognized the father at once. You've come for your son, he said. Well, you may have him only after you have passed a test. I will turn my daughter and your son into doves, and if you can tell me which of them is your son, you can have him. But if you fail, he stays with me forever. The father was very angry and ran from the house, ran and ran until he came to a forest where he lay down and wept bitterly. Then he fell into exhausted sleep. He dreamed that somebody was poking him, and he awoke to see a gray old man standing by his side. Why were you crying, my friend? Said the old man. The father told him all that had happened. I sacrificed everything I owned for the child, he concluded, and now I'll lose him forever if I fix on the wrong dove. The old man said, leave the forest, and you'll come to a field of rye. Pluck several stalks of them and take them with you to the sorcerer's. Tell him that you're ready for the test, and when he presents the doves to you, throw the kernels of rye in front of them. Watch carefully. The dove that gobbles up the rye is the sorcerer's daughter. The bird who is your son will eat slowly because he is yearning to be with you. The father did as he was told, and everything happened as the gray old man said. After the father had chosen the dove who was his son, the sorcerer said, "Yes, you've picked your son, but you can't have him unless you sign a contract that he will perform no magic in my lifetime." Well, the father agreed to the contract, and he and his son went on their way. Then the son said, "Father, you're very poor. Let me turn myself into a horse so you can take me to the market and sell me. You're certain to get a good price. But when you've sold me, be sure to take my bridle off. Otherwise, I will be a horse forever. When you've taken off the bridle, I'll turn into a dove and fly after you. And when I spot you, I'll fly down and turn into a human again." So the son turned himself into a horse, and his father led him to market. A great many dealers were interested in the horse, but the sorcerer was also there and saw what was going on. Disguising himself, he went up to the father and asked, "How much do you want for your horse?" "1,000 rubles," said his father. "Let me try him out and see if he's worth it," said the sorcerer. "Go ahead," said the father. The sorcerer jumped on the horse and said, "You'll see your son about as soon as you can see your own ears. You signed the contract and you've broken it." With that, he lashed the horse and rode away. When the sorcerer arrived home, he kept the animal in the stable. He beat it and watered it, but gave it no food. Then one day, the rich man in Odessa sent for him again to perform tricks at another banquet for the poor. Before leaving, the sorcerer told his daughter to give the horse 10 lashes and some water every day. Yet, the next morning, when the daughter entered the stable, she was moved by the horse's beauty. She caressed his head and removed his bridle. As soon as he was free of the bridle, the horse turned into a human, and she recognized him at once. "Give me some water," he said. And when she went to get the water, the boy turned himself into a dove and flew away. The sorcerer, on the way to Odessa, saw the dove in flight above him. At once he understood what happened, and he turned himself into a hawk and flew in pursuit, upon which the dove turned himself into a ring and dropped into the sea. The hawk transformed itself into a duck with a copper bill and searched for the ring in the sea. The ring, meanwhile, moved towards the shore, little by little, until it washed up on a beach. There it was spotted by the king's daughter, who had come to bathe. The duck, seeing her put the ring on her finger, flapped his wings and said to himself, "I'll not be able to get him now, but just wait. I'll use all my powers to get him back." Once she was at home, the king's daughter felt the ring squeezing her finger. So she tugged and tugged at it until it fell onto the ground, where it turned into a young man. "Don't be frightened," he said to her. "I'm human, and I'm a sorcerer. But a more powerful sorcerer is coming who means to kill me. He'll promise you mountains of gold for me, but it's only a trick. When he tries to take me, I'll turn into a ring again. Put the ring on your finger, and if he tries to grab it from you, throw it to the ground, and it will turn into a pea. Then he'll become a hen and try to eat me. But if you put your foot on the pea, it will turn into a polecat and wring the hen's neck." And that's what happened. And they threw the hen's carcass into the street. The boy went back to the sorcerer's daughter and married her. And they are alive and well to this day. Now the boy rides to Odessa instead of the sorcerer and performs tricks for the poor folk. The boy's father lives with them and is happy and has no need to go begging anymore. So there. What do you think of that, huh? Okay. This next story is called The Beggar King and the Melamed. In the city of Amsterdam, see, no once upon a time, huh? In the city of Amsterdam, there once lived a king, and the king knew several languages. The Jewish sacred tongue, Hebrew, among them. Going to bathe in the river one day, he happened to pass through the Jewish ghetto. There was a small house where a traditional Jewish schoolteacher, a Melamed, was teaching children the passage, "God topples the mighty to the ground and raises the lowly to the heavens." Getting out of his coach, the king went into the house and asked the Melamed what those words meant. The meaning was, the Melamed replied, that God can turn a king into a beggar and a beggar into a king. Hearing this, the king was very angry. "Prove it to me personally, and I'll reward you," he said. "But if you can't, I'll have you beheaded." The Melamed said he would indeed prove it, on condition that the king stay away from his house for at least 5 days. The king promised. As it happened, the Melamed was one of the 36, the Lamed Vavnik, the 36 holy men, without whom the world cannot exist. A Lamed Vavnik, Zadik. And he sat down and prayed. Meanwhile, the king went on his way to the river, and after turning his clothes over to a servant, jumped into the water. In a minute, a demon out of hell assumed the king's shape and emerged from the river. The demon called to the servant to bring his clothes to him. then dressed himself in the royal garments, and rode home to the palace. When the true king had had a good swim, he came out of the water and called his servant. But there was neither sound nor reply. The king shouted louder and louder, and ran about trying to find his clothes and carriage. Naked he searched for hours, until he was frozen. At least he wasn't out here tonight. Man, it's cold out there. Finally, he went home, still without clothing. The peasants in the street were amazed at the sight of a naked man shouting that he was the king. One even started to strike him with a whip, but an old peasant stopped him and gave the king a ragged coat to cover himself. The king went to his palace, but the soldiers guarding the gates drove him away, saying, "We don't allow beggars to approach the king's residence." The peasants pitied the refined-looking beggar, but none of them believed him when he claimed to be the king. Everyone knew the king was exactly where he was supposed to be. And that was how the king came to be a beggar. When he wanted to sleep, he had to go to the place where all the beggars spent the night. So, after 2 days, he left the city and went off to beg in the company of several other poor people like himself. Little by little, the king got used to his new life, traveling from town to town in the company of beggars. One day he was passing through the capital city again and found himself in the street that led to the river. From the house of the Melamed came the teacher's voice discussing the same passage and interpreting it to mean that God could turn a king into a beggar and a beggar into a king. So the king went into the house and begged the Melamed's forgiveness for having doubted him. And he asked the Melamed to help him become a king again. And the teacher promised that he would. The first thing he did was to trim the king's matted hair and beard. Then he bathed him and ordered a tailor to make him new clothes fit for a king. After that was done, he told him to go to church and wait outside at the time the king usually went to pray. When he saw the false king's coach drive up, the impostor entered the church. Then he, the real king, should call his coachman by name. The king, now dressed like a king, did everything the Melamed advised him to do. On Sunday, he stood outside the church and waited till the impostor drove up. When the false king was inside the church, and after the first prayer was recited, the real king called his coachman, who drove up at once and helped him into the coach. So the king drove home, and no one was the wiser. When the demon king discovered the trick, he fled back to his place in hell. Then the real king commanded that the Melamed be brought to him at the palace. He thanked him for his help and rewarded him royally. And from then on, and to the end of his days, the king was a friend of the juice. And there you have it. Okay, well, we have come to the end of our time together for tonight. I want to thank everybody for being here. And I hope you will return to be with us next week when we shall tell more stories. The next one is called Of Metals and Roses. So you have that to look forward to. Okay. So, until next time, my dear friends, I will say, Laila Tov.